Hey guys, Gold here. Welcome back to another little unscripted late night ramble. I say little, but I have no idea how long this one's gonna be. So, let's just get right into it. Tonight, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind for a while. It's something that I've had various discussions about with various different people, and it's something I've even lightly touched on in a couple of previous videos. And that is whether or not making Xerath into a slave was a good move on Riot's part. This is understandably going to be a very touchy subject, and there's a lot of history that goes into this sort of thing. And there's a lot of discussion to be had about Riot's execution of this premise and whether or not you agree with this direction, whether you think that it should have been handled radically differently. So let's get right into it. Now, I'll just say right off the bat, back when Azir first came out and Xerath's entire backstory was retconned and the Ascended were made into what they were, I was vehemently against this direction. I had grown very attached to Xerath as he was pre-reboot. I did not care for the sudden shift into making him not just a villain, but also a slave. It was a very turbulent time, to say the least. And I still don't think that this was perhaps the best direction that they could have taken. But over time, and I really cannot stress enough that the benefit of hindsight and some of the things that they've done in the lore since that retcon are major factors in why my opinion has changed. But I do think that Riot has handled it slightly better than people tend to give it credit for. Now, I will admit, part of it could also be even perhaps a tad unintentional in their part, and me just reading a bit between the lines, but let's get right into it, I guess. So, I don't think we need to go through like a whole recap of the stories of Xerath and Azir because it's a lot to go over, and, I presume that most of you already know the general deal, anyways, right? So, the TLDR is, Xerath was born a slave through a series of complicated circumstances. He winds up becoming the personal servant of, the youngest crown prince. Stuff happens. That prince winds up becoming next in line for the throne. Xerath basically becomes his right hand man. But even with such a prestigious title, Xerath is not actually liberated. He is still a slave. He is still, by law, Azir's personal property. And, that comes with a number of drawbacks, right? Like Xerath himself is not allowed to own property. He's not allowed, any of the basic rights or dignities that come from actually being a servant of the Empire, or not a servant, a citizen of the Empire. Um, so even though he has a place in Azir's royal court, Xerath is very much not free. Um, Even though Azir, as a child, promises that he would be free, again, I will not attempt to go over like the entire backstory, but yeah, so things escalate further and further. Um, as both men effectively start having their own agendas in the background of each other, right? Like, Xerath loses faith that Azir is ever going to liberate him, and he's sick and tired of being a slave, he's sick and tired of being property. So Xerath decides, after uncovering some forbidden texts in the royal archives, that reveal the true nature of the rite of ascension and how it's not actually some grand holy rite like everyone thinks it is. He decides that he's gonna try and undergo ascension, because he's like, if I can perform this ritual and basically turn myself into a god warrior, I will have the power to liberate myself effectively, right? Like, no one will be able to subjugate me ever again. Azir, meanwhile, has his own scheme that he's plotting in the background. In that Azir actually does plan to liberate not just Xerath, but all slaves in Serena, right? Like, Azir wants to abolish slavery, which, is by itself a very good thing. Like, I'm not gonna argue against that, but Azir also does understand that abolishing slavery is not by any means a simple process, right? For one thing, everyone in the empire who owns slaves, including a good number of the nobility and influential people across Shurima, are not going to take kindly to that. They're going to protest against him. Um, and, even like if you do liberate the slaves, you've then got to, take strides to actually, provide for them because odds are most of the slaves are not going to be educated. They're not really going to know how to take care of themselves. They don't know how to live their own lives. They've got to, they have nothing. So you'd have to like provide land and just basic necessities for them to be able to start living their own lives and teaching them how to do that. So Azir, he plans to liberate the slaves, but he also knows that it's a complicated process and he's trying to work out how to best do that. The issue is that Azir is hell bent on keeping this plan entirely secret. He doesn't tell anyone about his plan, not even Xerath, and I think part of this is because Azir gets it into his head, ironically, partially because of Xerath. Like, even before he attempts the Rite of Ascension, which we'll get back to in a bit, um, Azir kind of gets like this sort of messiah complex, right? Like he kind of gets deluded into thinking that he is the chosen one, that he is the one destined to lead Shurima into a new grand glorious age. And the abolishment of slavery is part of that, but he also seems to think that, this is something that he has to do alone. So Azir, he is actually convinced by Xerath to set up the Rite of Ascension, right? Because it's like Xerath, as a slave, cannot possibly get everything together that's needed for the rite. So he's gonna try to convince Azir, who already has this Messiah complex, to be like, hey, you're the destined emperor, right? So why shouldn't you undergo the Rite of Ascension? Because the thing, of course, is with the Rite of Ascension, it's the Rite of Ascension is the core of Shurima's empire, right? It's this magical rite where you basically pour sun magic on yourself and it effectively turns you into a demigod. The thing is, they've kind of built like this whole religion around it, and there are, sun priests. There's like this whole sort of cult that's meant to decide, oh, who's worthy of ascension, who in our great empire has earned that right. When in actuality, it's really just propaganda, because the right of ascension is not quite as divine as everyone thinks it is. It's not got anything to do with destiny. In fact, it's even faulty enough to create monsters called Bakai if something goes wrong. But, they try to sweep that under the rug. And so, it's like historically, the way that the Rite of Ascension has worked up until that point is the Sun Priests, they look at basically the best warriors and strategists and military assets that the Shriman Empire has to offer, right? Their smartest and their strongest, who've helped, suppress rebellions and to conquer more of a continent. And they're like, man, this guy is really helpful to us right now. He's strong, he's loyal, right? Or he or she, I guess, because there were guys and girls among the host. instead of the Ascended. But um, yeah, again, it's like it's all propaganda to be like, like with Nasus, for example, right? Like he proved himself to be one of the most brilliant tacticians in Shurima's history. So the Sun Priests are like, oh, Nasus is dying of like a disease. I don't remember if the disease is ever like given a name, but he's dying of a disease. We don't want to lose such a valuable military asset, such a valuable strategist, so we're going to let him undergo the rite of ascension and, hope that that turns him into a demigod that can then proceed to use his military expertise and power for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? But again, it's like historically, the Sun Priests are the ones who decide, who undergoes the rite of ascension, which despite their claims that, oh, you're like divinely chosen, it's really more of a process of you've been loyal and strong and or strategic enough to be a valuable military asset. So we want to keep you around and boost whatever boons you give to the empire, I guess. And that's like the truth that Xerath discovers. That's like theoretically anyone can attempt to undergo ascension. It's not a process of being divinely appointed. It's just whoever the priests say can undergo the ascension process. But Xerath convinces Azir, right, who's already got that Messiah complex, to try and undergo the rite. And Azir agrees. And even though the priests protest, Azir's like, no, screw you, I'm the Emperor, I'm gonna do this, and if anyone tries to protest, I will execute you. Straight up. Um, So, we all know how the story goes from here. It's that Azir, tries to have his own rite of ascension set up, only for Xerath to swoop in, kill him, and then take the rite of ascension for himself. And not only does Xerath wind up doing the rite of ascension instead of Azir, he keeps the ritual going for longer than it's supposed to, which turns him into, magical Dr. Manhattan, basically, right? A crazy blue energy man. But the process of doing so winds up destroying the entire capital city. So, Xerath and Nasus and Renekton fight. Xerath gets sealed underground, but Renekton gets trapped there with him. Darkened war shenanigans happen, all of that good stuff. And then, of course, centuries later, Xerath gets free and he decides that he now wants to take over the world because, in his own words, a lifetime as a slave has prepared me for eternity as your master or whatever. But Azir winds up getting resurrected through complicated bloodline shenanigans. And then he undergoes the rite of ascension, rebuilds the capital, and now Shurima is stuck in like another civil war between Xerath and Azir, both of whom are now ascended and both of whom want to effectively take over the world. So the core issue that a lot of people have with this is that when all of this was first happening, when this reboot first happened, when this, big retcon came out, it was very much portrayed that Xerath was the antagonist of the storyline, and Azir was being portrayed more as the protagonist. Right? There's even this like rather infamous quote from an interview with a writer where they said Azir is a dictator but a kind one, which is uh that's a phrase that really probably should have been thought through better, but yeah, it's like they clearly want to go the route of, oh, Xerath is, the villain and Azir is the hero of this story, which is not really the case. Like, the thing is, both of them are kind of assholes at the end of the day. And Riot has, in more recent years, started to acknowledge some more of Azir's faults, right? How his hubris is more of a detriment than anything. And it's like, yeah, he is rebuilding the empire and he's offering, the people of the desert prosperity that they haven't known for like thousands of years. But he also has a story where he like tries to march on this village and raze it to the ground and kill everyone there purely because this is the village that Xerath was born in like over 1,000 years ago. Like, he's willing to slaughter all these people and destroy this village out of spite for a guy who, frankly, probably doesn't even care anymore. Like, I very, very much doubt that Xerath has any emotional attachment left to any part of his past. But Azir is gonna do it anyways until a young girl actually talks him down and makes him realize what a idiotic, vindictive asshole he's being. But yeah, like, it's been interpreted by many that the story sets it up as like, Azir being the benevolent one between the two and Xerath being the antagonist, which again is made a bit worse by the fact that, Azir is the legacy to a dynasty that again built up its empire through conquest and slavery. And Xerath is the antagonist, even though all he ever really wanted was freedom, but now he's turned into an energy monster and wants to enslave everyone else. Yeah, it's not hard to see why people view this dynamic as problematic and why people thinking that Xerath being a slave was probably a very poor direction to go in. That being said, I actually really like the dynamic for the most part. Again, partially because of the fact that they've sort of walked back Azir being the protagonist. Because the way I see it, both of them are reflections of Shurima and the Shurima Empire itself, and how badly misused and misunderstood the Rite of Ascension is. Because you gotta remember, from what we've been told in the lore and everything we're led to believe, the Rite of Ascension originally was a way to fight back against the Void, right? It was meant to imbue people with the celestial power of the sun to create basically super soldiers that could fight back against an army of Eldritch horrors. And then eventually the people of Shurima were like, fuck it, let's just make, this army of demigods and use it to conquer a continent instead. And the Rite of Ascension becomes so core to the Shurima Empire as a whole. And for thousands of years, no one was really able to deal with the Ascended, right? Again, they conquered a continent, right? Even other nations that had their own powerful magics, right? Acathia had time magic, Ishtal had elemental magic, right? Like, everyone was bending the knee because no one could deal with an army of Ascended. One Ascended warrior is established to be capable of taking on an army by themselves. A group of Ascended warriors can effortlessly level a city, and when you've got like over a dozen Ascended warriors at your disposal, yeah, no one on the continent really stood a chance. Ascension was very much like the epitome of might makes right, where we're just, we're gonna use our army of demigods to conquer a continent. We're gonna enslave everyone who resists. We're gonna stamp out every other religion, and make everyone worship the sun or be branded as heretics and or slaves. And it very much kind of sets a precedent, I think, in the Shriman culture that, like, yeah, ascension is the ultimate power. If you've got it, you can just do whatever. And I think Xerath and Azir are both reflections of that, because that is 1000% the motivation, or like, not the motivation, but the method that both of them are using in their own respective goals, right? It's like Xerath is a slave. He wants to be free. He doesn't think that Azir is ever going to free him. So he's like, fuck it. If I become an Ascended, I'll have the power to just free myself. I can, subjugate Azir, I can subjugate anyone. I will no longer have to bend the knee to anyone ever again. Now, this plan does become slightly more questionable because, again, we've retroactively established that there were like a dozen other ascended warriors in Shurima, roughly. And again, I don't think Xerath himself even knew that he was going to turn into like a super energy being. At the time of that lore, like Nasus and Renekton were the only other ascended that we knew about that were there, but whatever. Xerath at least, comes to the conclusion of if I ascend, if I can undergo the rite, then I can just gain the power to break free of my own bonds. And Azir likewise kind of comes to that same conclusion, right? Like he's, understanding like I, despite being an emperor, do not have the power to just wave my hand and say all the slaves are free now, right? He knows that he's going to face opposition. He knows that he's going to have to deal with a lot of complicated issues. Um, and I imagine, Ascension must seem really promising because it's like, screw it, if I can turn myself into a demigod, first of all, any nobles or other influential people, right? Like, I'll be the first ascended emperor of Shurima, I'll be a literal god emperor, right? So, any, wealthy individuals, any slave owners that are going to try to protest my decree, I can just silence them with whatever crazy magical powers I get from Ascension. And maybe that'll even help in the process of setting up the slaves for a better life once I free them. Ascension kind of becomes this like crux that everyone in the Shuriman Empire leans on. It's like so utterly crucial to their entire culture. And it's like basically their solution to any problem. Just throw an ascended at it. If I need to solve a problem, I'll just ascend to gain the power I need to solve it. And so I think it's kind of poetic in the way that, these two attempting their own rites of ascension winds up being the downfall of the empire. No one, like, the Acathians tried, the Ishtali didn't even attempt to fight the Ascended, right? Like, not even the Void was able to tackle the Shuriman Empire. In the end, the only thing that was able to actually end Shurima was itself, or rather the thing that it had been relying on so long. Right? The Rite of Ascension that Shurima used as the crux of its dominance winds up being the very thing that overthrows it. And now, centuries later, we're seeing that Azir and Xerath are still doing the same thing, right? Like Xerath is out here basically still trying to be like, I'm gonna conquer the world because I think I'm owed it and I'm ascended now so I can do it, right? Similarly, Azir is still using ascensions like, I have been not only brought back to life, but I've been allowed to complete the ascension ritual that I started centuries ago. Clearly, this must be even further proof that yes, I am the divine chosen one. I am the one meant to rule this world. I guess it's just their whole dynamic really just goes to show how warped and twisted the whole process of ascension has become. In a way, both of them are reflections of Shurima itself and its biggest screw up that led to its original downfall. And now it's like we're on the path to Shurima tearing itself apart again because two idiots are misusing the power of ascension. So, yeah, I think that viewed through that lens, the dynamic between Xerath and Azir is honestly pretty great. I still understand in a way, if you've got issues with like, oh, the former slave is the villain. And I think it's not helped by the fact that Riot has kind of a bad habit of accidentally making those sorts of implications. They've gotten a lot more political ever since the Great Retcon, introducing issues like classism in Piltover and Zaun, and basically mage racism in Demacia, and having these oppressive systems in place in their fictional world. And then it's like we're gonna introduce characters who are trying to fight against these systems, but it's like, oops, the only one who is like really making a super active effort to undermine the corruption of Piltover and its influence over Zaun is Urgot, who's like this, violent anarchist. And oh, in Demacia, we've got Silas, this, also kind of anarchist revolutionary leader who wants to tear the entire country down, right? Like it's not a great look when you keep introducing these corrupt systems and then, you keep introducing like the only people who are making an active effort to change these corrupt systems are violent psychopaths. It definitely has some unfortunate implications that I don't think was intended, but it does not help in the long run, and I think it does retroactively hurt the core of Xerath and Azir's story when you can read it as, oh, like Xerath should have just, had trust in the system and his friend that things would have improved if he just did nothing. It's not a great look for Riot, and accidental as it may be, they've taken strides in more recent years to try to backpedal that by, giving Silas a whole arc in his own game that sees him realizing that maybe we can fix Demacia without literally burning it to the ground, and introducing characters like Seraphine who are trying to change Piltover and Zaun through less violent and destructive methods. But yeah, it's understandable why people tend to read the whole Xerath was a slave thing as problematic. But again, I really think that that was more accidental on Riot's part than anything. And honestly speaking, I think there's one thing that they could have changed to make the whole affair less messy. Because in the story, if you'll recall, right, when Xerath, kills Azir and takes his ascension, Azir decrees the slaves freed right before he tries to ascend. He decides, I'm about to become a demigod anyways. It's too late for anyone to stop me, so I'm just going to go ahead and start enacting my plan, and then I'm going to turn to a demigod, right? And we see, you know, soldiers step forth and release Xerath from his shackles, and Xerath still goes through with the plan anyways because he thinks that it's too late. It's like Xerath was given an opportunity to back down, but he followed through with it purely because he's like, nah, I've already gone this far. I'm going to get my ascension. Screw you, Azir. Like, I really do think if Azir's intent was to ascend and then make his decree, then I think the whole story would have been a lot smoother because it very much, kind of justifies Azir in the end, having kept Xerath in the dark, having kept his whole plan a secret, not trusting or telling anyone about it, and then it just kind of makes Xerath look like the asshole for continuing to betray Azir and take the Ascension when he really did not need to at that point. I think it's like if they had just had Azir stay silent and Xerath breaks free of his own chains, because it's like it's already established that Xerath had been studying magic at that point, right? Like I think he could probably, just like use a spell to undo his shackles, then kill Azir, step up and take the Rite of Ascension, right? And then it's like maybe you can have Xerath and Azir, centuries later during their Ascended Civil War, meet up, and like during that encounter, right, like as they're throwing, words and accusations back and forth, then Azir could be like, I was going to free you, I was going to free the slaves, right? And Xerath can counter with, oh, it was too late, you waited too long, you kept me in the dark, right? Because again, it's like at the end of the day, both Xerath and Azir are the villains of the story, right? Both of them are deluded tyrants who, think they can just do whatever they want because they're ascended, ironically failing to see or understand that that very mentality is what led the Empire to rule in the first place. But no, the canon story is that Azir freed Xerath at the last second to kind of, create a narrative that like Azir was kind of sort of in the right when yeah, it's like I think if they just changed that one detail, then things would be a lot less messy than they are. But as things stand, Riot did not handle the topic as tactfully as they probably could or should have, and it creates some unfortunate, if accidental, implications. But yeah, those are just my thoughts and feelings on the matter. So, what do you all think? Do you agree with my takes? Do you think that, still they should have just chosen a completely different angle from the slaves? Yeah, let me know what you guys think down below, and until next time, stay bright.